Navigating difficult conversations. That is the topic of our episode today. Now, I know so many of us have had those conversations. You know, the one we need to have with the person that we need to have it with, that we need to have it right now, but we have zero, and I mean zero, desire to have that conversation, whether that conversation is at work, whether it's about delivering bad news, negotiating a conflict, defending your ideas, whatever it is, these difficult conversations are not things that we want to have. But the truth is that we have to have these conversations because I like to say what we ignore festers. We may be able to kick it down the road, but it's never going to go away. So we have to address these issues. And I know that there's a lot of fear that comes with this. People are very fearful of having these conversations, and you might fear that you're going to ruin a relationship. You fear that you're going to be retaliated against or judged or ostracized, or, that it's just going to go completely bad. And so we don't want to have the conversations. And this became very, very, clear to me during the pandemic and right after George Floyd's murder, and when organizations were hiring me to do listening sessions for their employees because people wanted to talk about what was happening. People particularly wanted to talk about race and racism and police brutality, topics that were not usual fodder for the workplace, right? I had been, at that time in 2020, had been practicing law since 1995 and employment law since 1998. And we didn't talk about those things. Those are not things that we talked about. We talked about them in the context of litigation, but to just have an organization bring people in to say, hey, we want to have you have a listening session and listen to our employees talk about these issues. That wasn't happening. But after George Floyd and what was happening in the world, they didn't have a choice. So I did tons of listening sessions, including companies that were local companies, companies that were national companies or global companies. And it was really fascinating to do those listening sessions. I actually really enjoyed them. But as I was doing the listening sessions, I started to see a pattern from people. And one of the patterns that I saw was that people really want to have these types of conversations. At least some people really want to have these types of conversations, but they just don't know how to have them. And they're afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing, they're going to offend somebody, or some of them just don't even know how to start the conversation. And worst yet, they get into the conversation and it goes off the rails. What do they do then, right? They didn't know how to pull it all back in. And so I had done, you may have heard me talk about this in one of the other episodes. I had done the first town hall on race for Raymond James. And we were talking about these types of issues. And afterwards, I was asked to then do training for their leaders on how they really could effectively have these types of conversations. And, at the time, I was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's get it done. And I did the training. And then what I did was to write a book because I knew that people needed the skills and the tools because effective communication, influential communication, it is all an art and a skill. And so I developed a framework. I call it the perfect framework for courageous conversations. I developed that framework to help people to be able to navigate these conversations without causing collateral damage. And that collateral damage I'm talking about is that rejection, retaliation, judgment, people being ostracized, destroying relationships. Those are the types of things that I wanted to ensure that we could avoid when we had these conversations, because it is really, really important. And, I say navigate difficult conversations, and it's really not difficult conversations. It's actually conversations about difficult issues. And I think if we talk about it in that way, navigating conversations about difficult issues, then it probably makes it a lot easier for people, and be more receptive for people to have the conversations. But in shorthand, we'll call it navigating difficult conversations. So, I mentioned that I developed the perfect framework for courageous conversations. And the framework is really the P, the E, and the R. So the P stands for preparation. The E is for engage, or P stands for prepare. E is for engage. And the R is for reflect. So those are the three phases of making sure that you are able to navigate these conversations with courage and, without causing collateral damage. And I say with courage because having these conversations is scary. And I don't want you to think that you have to be fearless, that you can't be scared going into the conversation. You can, but you just need to have the courage to have it. And if you leverage the framework, then you will be able to do that. And you'll be able to do that courageously. So the framework, I'm going to go over it at a high level in this conversation, because it will take a lot of time to go through all of the pieces. However, the book is available on Amazon. Actually, my new book that goes into much more detail around the framework. The original book was a mini book, and I have since expanded the content around that book. And so the new book, which is again on Amazon, is called Convo Catalyst. So CONVO Catalyst, the humanistic guide to ignite dialogue, shift perspectives, and cultivate change. So wherever you get on your phone, get on your desktop, and you can order the book off of Amazon, and it'll give you all the detail. The framework is completely laid out in the book. So let's talk about how we really work through these types of conversations. First things first is to figure out, what is this conversation going to be about, right? So I mentioned before, are we talking about delivering bad news? Are we negotiating a conflict? Are we defending your ideas? Are we doing a performance feedback? Are we doing a termination or disciplinary meeting? Are we doing a workplace investigation? What are we talking about? And there's going to be something that triggers the need for having this conversation. And so we need to think about what those things are. And all of this is in this preparation stage, right? So the P part of the framework, when we're talking about prepare, before you step into any of these types of challenging conversations, you want to take the time to thoroughly prepare. And I mean really thoroughly prepare, right? And once you get the book and you see the framework, you'll see that inside of Prepare, we talk about several different things. And the two things that I want to focus on today, I'm going to give you some additional things, but the two main parts of preparation that I want to focus on, and that I always say when I'm doing training on my Convo Catalyst, or Inclusion Starts with Conversations, is you need to know the intention, so your intent, and the objectives when we're talking about having this type of conversation. So what do I mean by that? We want to know, what is the intention for having this conversation? So if I'm delivering bad news, or I'm gonna, negotiate in conflict, if I'm defending an idea, if I'm doing a termination, what's the reason that I want to have this conversation? Right? What is the reason for having this conversation? Also, what is the reason for having this conversation at this moment and with this particular person? Sometimes things come up and we decide we're going to go talk to this person, and it might not be the person that you need to talk to at that time. So in preparing and thinking about the intention, when you know the purpose, you will know, who do I need to speak to? Do I need to speak to them right now? Right? And so it is part of the preparation of it. The corollary to that is the objective. What is the objective? What are you hoping to get out of this conversation? What is the outcome that you're looking for? And that outcome is twofold. It's for you and for the person or the people who you're going to be speaking to. You need to know both of these things. You need to know your purpose or your intention, and you need to know the objective. The reason why is because these two things are the bookends of your conversation. If you know these two things, it will guide the tone and the tenor of the conversation. So that if you're in the conversation and you start to go off board, go, all over the place on a tangent, you find yourself somewhere that you don't need to be. If you know the intention and the objective, it will bring you back to center. It will bring you back to the place because you'll know, oh my gosh, if I go down this road, if I keep asking these questions, or if I keep getting these responses, I am not going to get the outcome. This is not why I wanted to have this conversation. So those bookends in the preparation stage are vitally important for you to be able to get the outcome, right? And to have the conversation not end up in a disaster. One of the other things that you'll see in the preparation stage is that you need to research, right? You need to gather all the relevant facts and the information that you need to be able to support your points when you actually do get to phase two, which is to engage in the conversation. So you might anticipate questions, you might anticipate issues, you might, think through answers. And some people say, role play the whole conversation. I want you to be cautious of that though, because sometimes when we do that, we we create the stories, we create ideas, we create things that we think are going to happen, and then because we have said them out loud or we have practiced them, they become somehow factual, and then we go into the conversation and those things might not be said or something similar, and then we are interpreting it in a different way. So I'm not saying don't think about it and don't work through it. But I'm just saying be mindful that when you're rehearsing, you're not creating the story and the scenario, and then you're going to take that and put on top of the conversation that you actually are going to have at that moment. Another thing you'll see in our perfect framework is that you need to be mindful of your emotions and whether or not you are the right person to have the conversation and whether or not this is the right time. Is there some bias? Is there some anger? Is there some mistrust? Is there something that because of who you are and who that person or the people are, that again, it would really be misaligned with your intention and your objective. So again, the preparation is key in this. And you'll see everything we're talking about, especially if you're talking about communication, preparation is key, right? Really understanding where you are and what you're doing and going and who you're communicating with is vitally important to the success of the communication. So going into it, you want to be prepared. You want to have all your ducks in a row. The more prepared you are, the less room there is for surprises. And the more prepared you are, the more confident you will feel about having the conversation and also having control over the discussion and staying within those bookends of intent and objective. So that's the first phase, which is preparation. And then the second phase is engaging in the conversation. Here's another vitally important thing to understand. This is a dialogue, not a debate. And yes, that's coming from the lawyer, that this is a dialogue and not a debate. I'm always up for confrontation. That's just a part of my profession. However, when you're having these types of conversations about difficult issues, if what you're going to have is a debate, just know that it probably won't end well. What's going to happen is you're going to be entrenched in your side and the other person's going to be entrenched in their side, because the whole nature of a debate is that somebody has to be right and somebody has to be wrong. But these types of conversations around difficult issues, what we really want to do is have an exchange of ideas and hope to come to some understanding. And I said understanding, not agreement. You don't have to agree, right? What you can come to is an understanding that we're going to agree to disagree. But if we come into the conversation as a dialogue and understand that we're going to be exchanging ideas, it takes away the right and wrong. It takes away the some of the resistance and the defensiveness and the need to justify things, and allows you to communicate and share your ideas with each other. And so in this engage stage is when you really need to employ and deploy your emotional intelligence, right? We have to be aware of how we manage our emotions, being aware of our emotions and managing them, and also managing the emotions of the people that we're speaking to, right? And being aware of their emotions and responding appropriately to those emotions. So first, going back to that preparation stage and making sure that you are in the right frame of mind to have this conversation, that you're in the right mental state and that they're in the right mental state to have the conversation. And there are many things that you can do. And I talk about this in the book. I talk about different types of breathing techniques that you can use to calm your nerves before and during the discussion. I talk about other techniques that you can use as you're going through the conversation to really make sure that you keep the conversation on track. We talk about making sure that you're actively listening during the conversation, that you're not double dutching and just waiting for your turn, right? When's my turn? When's my turn to respond? That you're actually listening to what's being said so that you can engage around what the person is saying, so that the person feels, and same for you, that you feel that you're being heard and that you're being listened to, that your thoughts are being respected. And one of the ways that you can show people that you're actually listening to them is to reframe or to ask clarifying questions. That lets them know that you are tuned in, right? So while you're in this conversation, I need you to pay close attention to not what only is being said, but how it's being said, right? That will help you, because one of the things that we talk about in the engage phase is around minding your manners and watching how people are behaving, and not trying to, if you offend somebody, not trying to justify the offense or turn it back on them or be defensive about it. And also, if somebody says, I'm done, to really be done. So, things you want to look for are obviously the verbal cues. People tell you things, but you also want to look for nonverbal cues. You want to look at body language. You want to look at tone. So to make sure that things are still, going the way that you intend to. And always we are mapping this against our intent and our objective. Because when we're paying attention to body language, when we're paying attention to tone, when we're paying attention to the words that people are saying, this can provide valuable insight into the way other people are feeling, and the perspectives that they have, right? So, for example, if someone's tone all of a sudden becomes defensive, it might be useful for you to acknowledge their feelings and then rephrase your points in a way that addresses their concerns so that you don't escalate the tension, right? So you have to be really part of the engagement piece, and part of this being a dialogue is that you have to be very present. And this is why I was saying be cautious of the whole rehearsing, because if you've rehearsed it and you have things in your head, that might be playing in your head, right, as background music, and the person is speaking, but that background music is interfering. And so you're not able to be fully present in the conversation. Those are the types of things that will derail the conversation. Those are the types of things that will cause collateral damage and buy into the whole notion of why we shouldn't be having these types of why we don't want to have these conversations in the first place. So you want to be mindful of that in the engagement stage. And again, There's tons of information for you and ways to, navigate the engagement stage in my Convo Catalyst book. So then let's move on to phase 3, which is the reflect stage. And this is we've had the conversation. So we've prepared for the conversation. We've actually had the conversation. And now the conversation is over. So what do we do? The very first thing that we have to make sure that we do is not cause collateral damage, right? So when we're talking about difficult issues, we might be talking about, sensitive information. We might be, we might learn things that we didn't know about someone. And you have to be careful. That does not become water cooler talk. That is not, and I probably just aged myself, but anyway, that doesn't become social media fodder. That's not the thing to go post on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or wherever the heck we're posting these days. But we don't want to take that information and spread it unless, right? Unless, and this is part of the reflect phase, unless we need to, unless that information needs to be shared in order to either educate other people, or perhaps it's to adjust something, change something. For example, a policy. You learned something in this conversation about how things are being done or not being done. Maybe there's a practice or a policy that needs to be adjusted or changed, or maybe there's one that needs to actually be implemented. Now, those are the types of things that you would want to share. But the things that are private, you don't want to. And one of the things that you can do is in the engage phase, when maybe there's something that you're learning from that conversation, ask permission. Say, is it okay if after this conversation, I share it with blah, 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 right? The people who need to know, not putting a post out, but is it okay if I share it with HR? Is it okay if I share it with the executive team? Is it okay if I share it with our council? Because this is really important for us to know. Is it okay if I share it with your manager? Whatever it is, so that they already know that this is something that you're going to do. And if they say no, unless it's something that you know that you have to mandatorily report, then don't do it if they say no, right? But I think if you ask in the right way, and then you share why you want to share that information and why you want to share it with that, whoever you need to share it with, then that will go a long way in them giving you permission to share that information. But you really just want to share that information because it's necessary to resolve maybe the issue that brought this conversation to the forefront in the first place, right? And if there is once you have these types of conversations, follow up. And the follow up could be something as simple as, are things okay? How are you doing? We had this conversation a week ago. Just want to check back in. Is there anything else that I need to know? Has anything come up since then? And if you know that there are other things that you all need to talk about, or during the conversation, you made a plan that you were going to, address additional issues, then that's something that you need to do in the follow-up. And that brings me back to one thing I want to say about the engagement piece of it. Sometimes, especially like in the employment, if you're talking to employees, there may be multiple issues. And I guess with family members too, right? Outside in personal issues, there may be multiple things because we don't like to have these conversations. So we just let them sit and fester, and they add up and add up and add up. So now it's like, oh, I want to have this conversation and there's 10 things. No. Let's talk about one thing. Let's focus when we're in the conversation. Let's get a rapport. Let's get us comfortable with having these types of conversations, and then we can address other ones once we've had this one conversation. Don't overwhelm yourself or the other person, because then you'll never want to do this again, right? Because remember, the goal of this is to reach a constructive resolution. It's that, and back to what I said, it doesn't mean you have to agree. It's just to have a constructive resolution, whatever that resolution is. And you will already know what that resolution is when you prepare, because that's your objective, right? So again, back to our bookends of intent and objective, that will help you to understand what the resolution is that you're looking for you and for the other person. So, make sure that you are always staying within those parameters, right? And at the end, talk about, what that resolution is. Talk about whether or not you reach the resolution. And even before, again, I'm flipping back and forth, but going back to the engagement stage, when you go in, you could talk about, that your goal is to find some common ground or find mutual benefits or really, address this situation or make sure that, their performance in increases to a level that is in alignment with the expectations of their role. Now, if you're having a termination discussion, that's a whole different thing, but you still want that to be respectful. So, be mindful of that. And if during some point the conversation starts to go off track, just stare it back. Stare it back between your bookends. Stare it back between the purpose and the objective and get it on track. Again, because if you don't, having that conversation go off track, when you get to this reflect stage, you are going to go against everything that we have been trying to do, which is to avoid collateral damage. So, really, really important. The most important is the preparation stage and having these types of conversations. Also, being very clear about the boundaries around the conversation. Make sure that the conversation remains purposeful. Make sure that the conversation remains respectful. And if at any time, either one, right, either side feels that it's no longer any of those things that you've gone, you're going over the boundaries. It's no longer purposeful. It's no longer respectful. Somebody doesn't feel safe in the conversation. It's time to end the conversation, right? It's time to end the conversation. And in that moment, you can try to reschedule it, or you can wait and try to reschedule it at a later time. But again, these conversations about these difficult issues are conversations that must be had, whether it's in our personal lives or in our professional lives. They don't go away, they only get worse. So, if you really want to be skillful, really, really want to be skillful, two things. One, you can go buy the book, Convo Catalyst, and you can try to do it on your own. But I also work with organizations to train their employees on how to have these types of conversations. So I could do that through a keynote or like a 60-minute training. Or we also have our Convo Catalyst experience, which is an interactive workshop where we use our Convo Catalyst cards to actually help you role play and work through. So that will be a good time to role play in situations where it's not real, but it will give you a sense of how to work through the perfect framework and really how to work through when you have your own situation that you need to deal with. So the bottom line is that approaching difficult conversations with thorough preparation, emotional intelligence, and a clear focus on your intent and your objective can significantly enhance your effectiveness as a communicator, as an influential communicator. So, these strategies are not only to help you just navigate these tough interactions, but also empower you to lead them confidently and courageously, right? I started off talking about having courage to have these conversations. So, I'm going to encourage you to start implementing these tactics in your next conversation. I'm going to encourage you to go have that conversation that you have been putting off day after day, week after week, month after month, and maybe sometimes year after year, and get it off your chest. right? But not get it off your chest in a bad way. Get it off in, or, a harmful way. Get it off your chest in a way that relieves you and the other person or people of the burden of carrying around an issue that could be resolved, and a lot of times is due to miscommunication or lack of communication. So, you know, my intention has always been the same from the very beginning when I wrote the book, is to ensure that people have the skills to engage in these conversations in a meaningful way, in a way that reduces the fear, in a way that you don't feel like you're going to, everything that you said is somehow going to be used against you, and that you're going to be worse off for having the conversation than not having the conversation. So go chat. Go have a conversation. Become a convo catalyst. You're going to see how it's going to transform the way that you communicate, and it will definitely pave the way for you to have more productive outcomes and stronger relationships. So that's it for now. You can go get Convo Catalyst on Amazon. Can't wait to hear your thoughts. And until next time, take care.